Hello and welcome. Good evening, everyone. My name is Rowan Conway. I'm Director of Innovation and Development here at the RSA, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to this evening's lecture. Before we begin, can I ask you to make sure your mobile phones are switched to silent, although we are filming tonight and live streaming over the web, so welcome to those of you who are watching online, and a reminder that the hashtag is RSA Bossom if you'd like to get involved with the discussion on Twitter, so don't turn your phones necessarily off. Now that the housekeeping notices are over, I'm delighted to introduce this evening's special event. Tonight's lecture is part of the RSA Bossom series with a focus on the built environment and society. This series was endowed by Lord Alfred Bossom, architect and politician, who in 1965 was the chair of the RSA between 1957 and 59. That doesn't quite work. I'm pleased to welcome members of the Bossom family attending this evening, and I would like to offer kind thanks on behalf of the RSA for their valued support. Now, onto the programme. It's my great pleasure to introduce this evening's speaker, Alison Brooks. Alison is Principal and Creative Director of Alison Brooks Architects. Her practice portfolio ranges from urban regeneration and master planning to public buildings for the arts, higher education and housing. She's developed an international reputation since founding her practice in 1996. Her architectural approach emerges from broad cultural research, with each project expressing a specific response to place, community, and landscape. Alison was appointed to the RSA's Faculty of Royal Designers for Industry in November 2017, and we're really especially delighted to welcome her back here so soon to give this Bossom lecture. Alison's work demonstrates a sustained commitment to rigour and innovation in thinking about design and improving quality of life for all. In her talk this evening, Alison will speak about the architect's duties to respond to the social, cultural and physical context in their work. And then I'll be joining Alison on stage later, and I'm looking forward to hearing your questions in the discussion then. But that's enough from me, so without further ado, please join me in welcoming Alison Brooks.
Thank you, Rowan, and thank you to the RSA and also to the Bossom family and Foundation for sponsoring this lecture. It's a pleasure to be here. It's an honor. And also, I look forward to actually working with the RSA and participating in the programs of education and design culture that the RSA actually is such a strong voice for. So my talk tonight is, it's got a kind of a strange title, if not us, then who. But I thought it would be important to sort of think about this bigger question in terms of architects, designers, the role we play in society and beyond our profession, but also within our various professions. And it just sort of struck me walking around my neighborhood, Kelvin, recently. And the sense of waiting, I think, that most people have when they sort of experience the built environment, especially going around the city. You see so much decay, you see a lot of problems, you see a lot of, sort of places that need sorting out and things in a very English way. Things that are broken, waiting to be fixed. They're waiting for someone to care about them and to care enough to do something about them. And so who is going to care about all these things that need to be fixed, and when? So if not us, designers, architects, engineers, then who? Who else is going to apply themselves to these problems? Of course it's us, we would all say. But does society really understand that? Does society at large, the public at large, really see designers and architects and engineers as applying themselves to the issues, the sort of general issues of commodity, delight, joy in the built environment that we see the potential in? But underlying this sort of general issue of who is going to address these problems is an underlying, ever-present need and desire for beauty, that taboo subject. And I think that we all would acknowledge that everyone wants a beautiful life. There's nobody who doesn't want a beautiful life. But I say this not just in the aesthetic sense, but in our relationships, in a philosophical sense, in our journeys, our life experiences and activities, our memories. So I think the term quality of life is used a lot in architecture and planning in the built environment, that we have to think about quality of life. But I'm arguing that we have to think about a beautiful quality of life. And once you add that adjective and that concept to everything you talk about, the sort of the ground changes, the game changes. So of course, as designers, we can't directly affect all of these qualities of life, but we can help. We can help frame those experiences and memories with a beautiful context. It's not just about the things that we can design or sell. It's about making places that we offer freely and leave a sense of care and beauty hovering somewhere in people's subconscious. No one can measure this impact. So architects, designers, engineers, everybody who's engaged in making things, designing things, I believe has a duty to help people live beautiful lives. This is my motivation behind working in housing. Housing of all building types should be the most beautiful and should help people lead more beautiful lives. So if it's not us, architects and designers, who deliver to our clients and users and to the wider public, who else will do this? So this is the kind of preamble to my lecture. So I spent this spring sort of working with my team towards a big event in the life of my practice, which was my 21-year anniversary of ABA. And this was also an opportunity to, in a way, declare my values as an architect. And these are images of our party at Somerset House, which some of you may have come to. I'm not sure. It was a one-day exhibition, a public talk, and then we had a party in the evening. And it was the opportunity to publish a book. So we self-published this book, Ideals, Then Ideas, a kind of catalog of the exhibition. And in it, I stated in a slightly more elaborate form these 4 ideals that I believe in retrospect have underpinned and continue to underpin my work as an architect. So in a way, they're also a quest. They're a mission to express authenticity, generosity, civicness, and beauty in all of our work, regardless of client or budget or scale. And so in the book, I sort of describe our projects according to certain themes. So they're kind of design themes, obsessions that have, in a way, been behind projects that I see as experimental, such as houses. One-off houses are always a kind of canvas for experimentation, but sort of things that represent evolving interests as a designer, and things that, in a way, reflect on history, the history of design and architecture. And history is very important to me, and I think in urban design and living in cities, we're surrounded by history all the time. We're making history. And cities also must be designed, and it's a form of art. And I think what's interesting in these 2 images is, obviously, that's Christopher Wren's redesign of the City of London after the Great Fire. And on the right is Sir John Galt's design for Guelph, Ontario, the city that I grew up in, that was founded in 1827. And it's just amazing that and it was founded basically in the middle of the woods in southern Ontario. There was a river and, forest. But the principles, the idea of designing a city with squares, with axes, with civic space, with ecclesiastical architecture, a hierarchy of urban blocks and streets. This impulse to design cities, I think, in a way we've we've lost, in a way, city design as an art form, and we have to rediscover that. I'm not trying to disrespect all the work that we all do in master planning, but I think the terminology that we all use is one of master planning, and it's not of the city as a work of art. Another proposition or obvious project is the city as a collective and collaborative design project. One of my goals as an advocate for the Mayor of London, design advocate, is to create local hubs, co-design hubs in every London neighborhood so that everybody can see what's going on an online platform, what's going on locally, and contribute and participate in their design. So the idea of city and urban design and city design as art can also be participatory. And then the other really important thing to me are archetypes, sort of building forms such as quadrangles, which are also urban forms, and Somerset House, which is one of my favorite buildings in London, and its amazing adaptability over 300 or 400 years to take on new lives, new programs, new clientele. This is a kind of overview. Sorry, there's a bit of a delayed reaction on my iPad, so I'm sort of watching the image come up slowly. This is an overview of some of the work of my practice, which you can see ranges from sort of one-off installations, such as the Smile, house extensions, housing in the suburbs, which I think is another sort of great untapped field for architecture, Folkestone Performing Arts Centre, Accordion Cambridge, housing in Bath, and then Exeter College in Oxford, which is their new 90-student, 6,000 square meter quadrangle. And we're also doing a lot of housing elsewhere. This is some of our work in South Kilburn. We're doing towers, our first towers in the Greenwich Peninsula and King's Cross, which are here. The Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park, another old image from Accordia, South Acton Estate regeneration, Cambridge, 2 projects in Cambridge, and again, Kilburn. So each one of these projects has a very different response to its context, which I hope sort of demonstrates that commitment to specificity and to responding to the locale and the sense of place of each of our projects. So I'll just quickly, also I thought it would be important to talk about a project, the Smile, which was the landmark pavilion for the London Design Festival in 2016. And it was a really fantastic sort of experimental project, and I thought was appropriate for this forum because it, in a way, is a synthesis of engineering, architecture, and space and geometry, and in a way became a kind of art piece, a public art piece that was inhabitable. And we called it the Smile. It was a project that had a kind of amazing brief, which was from the London Design Festival and the American Hardwood Export Council, with 290 cubic meters of raw tulip wood, which resulted in 70 cubic meters of hardwood CLT. We had to make something amazing and something temporary, something obviously using hardwood CLT, and it had to be for the public, temporary, and something that sort of engaged everybody in the ideas and processes behind architecture and design. And so my first thoughts were, how do you make a flat panel, such as hardwood CLT, stronger and spatial and do something spectacular structurally? And so the idea of a rectangular hollow section made of CLT was my kind of first reaction to get a stiff form, and to, in a way, do the opposite of what long span structures tend to do, which is sag in the middle if you have a long beam or a hollow tube, and supported at each end it sags. And thought, how could I make a timber structure, a very long beam, actually lift at each end and do something completely unexpected as an arc? And the reason we called it. The smile was that it does create this kind of supersized graphic on the horizon of a building that actually is smiling. And it, in a way, challenges visitors to enter and to climb this sloped surface, which is another sort of really unexpected and unusual experience. And we worked on a lot of different geometries, and obviously all working within a 70 cubic meter limit of material, which is quite tough, but we arrived at a 50 meter radius, 34 meters long, and that's the most we could get out of our 73 cubic meters. We also had to find a public place in London that could sort of accommodate this object, and after looking at virtually every single square and with lots of possibility, we arrived at the University of the Arts, London. And we had another challenge, which was that it couldn't have foundations, and it could only be 1 meter deep, because the archaeological remains of Millbank Prison were 1 meter below the square. So we came up with the idea of making a cradle filled with steel counterweights to hold this sort of spectacularly long cantilevers in place. And here you can see the kind of various thicknesses we had to use. The engineering design was by Arup, and we worked on also perforations that express the structural forces in the material. So these holes actually illustrate where the forces are acting the least, and they become a kind of structural ornament. And so it was made in 12 pieces. We were working with the very largest pieces of CLT that can be manufactured to reduce waste. It was made in Germany, outside of Munich. All the pieces were trucked in, and it was erected in about 5 days. And so that's the little sort of excavation that we made. And the whole thing was held together with approximately 7,000 very long screws. You can see here they're about half a meter long. So it's, in a way, a new technique of structural design, where the material itself is working, obviously, in tandem with the screws to create sort of rigid moment connections between timber panels. So it was a very popular piece. Everybody who walked through the square of the school on the way to the British, the Tate, couldn't resist walking in and actually trying it out. And so it was really engaging. The sort of pure geometry meant that it was kind of easily understandable. The idea that it's a piece of a wheel, it's a big timber beam, it's sort of connected to people in terms of sensory experience. It smelt of timber as you walked in, and this very kind of immersive experience of a material, a space, and geometry that was very pure. There's nothing else in there other than 4 plates that held together the main panels. And the idea was that each end of the tube would funnel, would create a framed space. At one end, the Edwardian architecture of the art school, and at the other end, a tree. So this sort of counterpoint between two perspectives. Everybody ran up and down the slope. There's something about curved floors that make people run up and down them. I don't know what it is, but it was really a fun experience for people of all ages, teenagers and kids. And it also encouraged sort of touching the walls, looking through these small holes, which created their own sort of framing of the view. And probably the most dramatic view was up at the top of the arc, next to the balustrade, where you got a sense of sort of infinite curvature, like being in a wheel. So it was a really fast project, 6 months, working with Arup, with AHEC, with the manufacturers, and then a local team who did the final finishing work. And I like to make this clear that this is a project where the client always said yes. There was never a no in the entire process of design, assembly, and manufacture. So the next project I want to talk about is a housing project, and I know this is, in a way, well, civicness is one of the sort of 4 ideals that I've stated in my book, and I think this is really important in terms of housing. I think housing is actually public building, it's civic building, because housing forms the space of the street, and so the public realm is not just the ground plane, the public realm is also the facade. It's also the overall form, and it's the spaces that, the shared spaces that housing forms, which is the space of cities. So civicness is a condition of reciprocity, a framework for the private activities of its users that automatically creates an arena for public life and social exchange. So I've been working in the South Kilburn estate in Brent in northwest London for about 8 years now, and doing 3 projects. And I'd like to show this image because it's an image of South Kilburn in 1939, and I consider it a kind of perfect, it's a perfect Victorian city in a way. You know, urban blocks, avenues, down here, mansion blocks, sort of crafts, artisan cottages, pubs, factories, parks, but it's a kind of very clear and designed urban form with squares, sort of triangular squares and chevrons. This is a designed piece of city. And sadly, as we all know, South Kilburn, like many parts of London and all over the UK, suffered bomb damage, but even more than bomb damage, sort of urban renewal, complete removal of the street network, demolition of that whole pattern of urban blocks and terraces, and the erection of sort of buildings atomized, sprinkled around in green space. And a few, before everything was demolished, some of the sort of Victorian villas and terraces were preserved. Luckily, there was a kind of preservation movement that happened in the late 50s, but a lot of this part of London is actually still in its state of kind of exclusion and segregation, which I think the sort of modern project of estates sort of inflicted upon the city. So we've been doing three projects, all one in competition, all one in collaboration with other architects. And the first one, well, this is sort of the South Kilburn estate, so you have slab blocks and towers in sort of isolated areas, and in the distance you can see the kind of normal condition of Victorian London. So Ely Court, Brent Council opened up this part of their estate regeneration master plan to competition to insert 44 units of housing in this place, which looks green and leafy, but green and leafy areas often disguise poverty and exclusion, and a kind of real gap in the urban fabric and sort of dangerous places that are away from the street. And so our scheme, so this was the existing site. You can see buildings sort of turning their backs to the street. We always look at the Victorian plans of cities and places where we work to understand the sort of original pattern of development. And we discovered a mews that formerly sort of was part of the block structure. And we thought it would be really interesting to try to reinstate that idea of a mews street to connect the various parts of the neighborhood. So our first instinct was to put a sort of terrace, to replace the sideways buildings with street-facing terraced houses and maisonettes in a sort of mansion block. And then we thought we could actually include the estate and the 1960s architecture in framing a new public space, a new garden square. And then by introducing a new mews, we actually connect the new buildings and their neighbors into the regular public fabric of the street network. So this becomes a safe place that's overlooked and people move through rather than a place of kind of isolation. So this was the final master plan. So we had 3 blocks, a terrace block. So this is a mansion block with cores and maisonettes on the ground floor. And these are mews houses. And then this is a little completion of the Flatiron pub block. So we called this the Flatiron Building down here. And the new mews that connects through to our collaborating architect scheme, that's Lifshitz Davidson Sandilands scheme. And that comes out to the street where there's a local pub. So this was the, they're pretty simple forms, but the gesture and that each of these buildings makes towards the street, I think, is the most important thing about the architecture, and the idea of creating a series of layers between the street and the home in terms of landscape. So in a way, the problem of the South Kibberner Estate, which is places like this, which are isolated blocks on parking podiums away from the street, and we all of a single tenure, so everybody, on social rent, and the new format is mixing private sale and rent. So this building is private sale, and this building and these buildings are social rent with a mix in there. So it's about integrating communities as well as integrating the architecture of these places. So again, this is the site plan with common entrances into the flats above and then through houses on the ground floor. So there's a lot of variety, a lot of different types of units in the scheme. I think we're pretty lucky. It's very rare to have so many lifts serving so few flats, but Brent Council was very good about saying we don't want lifts to serve more than 20 flats at any one time. And we also had very nice through units. Every unit in this scheme is a through unit. There are no single aspect homes. And we work on lots of funny brick assemblies to get our sort of very subtle inflections in the geometry to work. So this is the final scheme, and you can see in a way how we're responding to the context and the sort of heritage of the place, and sort of reconstructing the street and the relationship of the homes to the street and to the neighborhood. So this is just, and very important for me is actually the veranda or portico. We do them on all of our projects. And so this becomes a very important threshold between the public realm of the pavement and the private dwelling. And it also expresses that this is a maisonette. So that's the sort of balcony off the bedroom upstairs. So these are more or less houses embedded in this terrace, and these are flats above. And this is south-facing, so every terrace is sheltered, it's covered or recessed within the footprint of the building. And these are really, really well used in rain and shine and throughout the year. So these porticos create this important filtering, and then the common entrances are marked with double height spaces. And every flat is 2.6 meters floor to ceiling height. I refuse to do anything lower than 2.6 meters in any of our housing schemes. And we always try to maximize, well, every window is a French door. I don't think you can really do anything better than a French door when it comes to windows. So that's another constant mission. And these are the sort of quality of the balconies in each of the homes that actually create an additional sense of space, that you have a sort of room, an outdoor room that's very usable and creates that added sense of generosity. And then this is the new garden square that's framed by actually 5 generations of London architecture. The 1950s, one of the first in situ concrete tall buildings in London, our Flatiron Building, Georgian or Victorian terraces, and then 1950s buildings. So it's, in a way, bringing completely new quality of space and light and life to the residents of South Kilburn. This is another scheme, our second one, Bronte and Fielding House. These are on the top floor. They're 3-meter high ceilings. This is all social rent, and I think it's really important to actually create these places that are really robust, really generous buildings that over time could take on many different uses and not just be housing. So we use this image, which is the living room of one of our affordable housing schemes, to show how we can make places that are great for studios or displaying art or living in. It's about space that's adaptable and generous. So the next scheme, I'm not sure why this is going blank, but so these are the muse houses that sort of wrap around the back of the site. And this is the kind of sense of depth and relief that you get from the street. So there's a sort of complexity to the elevation, and it doesn't have that sort of flatness that many housing schemes have. So the next project I'm going to talk about is in King's Cross, and this is something that we're designing at the moment, and I think probably everybody here knows that King's Cross is undergoing an amazing transformation, and Argent are, again, another enlightened client, along with Brent Council, who are our client for Ely Court, who are interested in ideas of authenticity, of preserving the character and grain of the sort of King's Cross as a rail depot, but are developing it substantially, like incredibly ambitious project. And we won a competition for a site at the top of the park, and as you know, there's Argent are producing a sort of collection of really high quality buildings, both office and residential, and really great quality public realm. And so the site that we competed for is up here at the top of the park. This is Lewis Cubitt Park, and this is Coal Drop Yard and Central St. Martin's here. And in a way, our brief was quite tough because there is a Thameslink tunnel running under the site. It's got 5 sides. It hasn't really got a back. But we worked with the massing and the modeling, obviously height limits, to create a kind of hybrid perimeter block, courtyard block, that both acts as a tower and a landmark for the park, a sort of terminus to the park space, but also creates a kind of rich urban experience as you move around the building. And so our sort of competition scheme included a yard, a sort of public space at the center of the block, colonnaded all around. And the idea was that this building makes a threshold both from the north, from York Way, as well as from the south. And, you know, like all housing architects, we worked long and hard to get our units to be exactly on area and our numbers working within the plan and super efficient and achieving the mix. But so the really important thing for me was to create a sort of cityscape and a sense of quality at the in terms of the public realm, and to bring the sort of character of King's Cross up to the north end of the development. And so we have this arched colonnaded base, which also reflects the history and the character of King's Cross itself, the station, its wonderful arches. And so this was our scheme, our competition, at competition stage, which we're developing now for planning in a few months. But in a way, the most important thing is the arcade and the way it actually invites a public use and creates that sort of identity, which is very much about King's Cross, the bright red brick of St. Pancras Station, and a new language of arches, which are all Bezier curves. And this was the idea of a sort of very welcoming threshold from the north. And so it creates a new kind of gateway to King's Cross, and that this space could be used as a kind of yard or just a place that you discover, an unexpected place. And so this, and the kind of sculpting of the roof line is all about getting sun into this yard space and views, as well as the sort of sense of a continuous public realm. It also fronts a square at the side, and so restaurants and cafes and shared space on roof gardens. So this is, in a way, I suppose, another kind of project where authenticity and generosity are a goal not only of us as designers, but also of our client. And I like to talk about these clients in the same way that Exeter College, one of the ancient colleges of Oxford, is also a client that invests in the long term, in the quality of the city, of a very wide constituency that actually embraces a sort of, centuries of achievement and scholarship, but also architectural achievement. And so we did a competition in 2011, a sort of two-stage competition to design a new quad, a new collegiate quadrangle for Exeter College of 90 student rooms and another 3,000 square meters of seminar space, auditoriums, courtyards, music practice room, all sorts of program, basically the campus within a building, which is what many Oxford colleges are like. And the other interesting and great thing about Oxford as a city is that its morphology, like Cambridge, in its historic core is made up of quads. So the colleges, which were formerly monastic communities in sort of defensive enclaves, has become, in a way, the form of the city and the character it conveys. And so this Exeter College has its original site in Turl Street and Broad Street in the center, and they purchased a new site next to Worcester College on Walton Street in 2010, and they staged a competition for a new quad. And, you know, it's a very daunting thing to try to live up to a legacy like Exeter College, which has Jacobean halls and Georgian quads and ranges and George Gilbert Scott chapels that are wonders of neo-Gothic architecture. So, you know, we started our process of design looking at the kind of evolution of Exeter College and of the quad itself, which interestingly is usually made up of many different periods and styles of architecture and very characterful roof lines and a sort of history of very elaborate articulated roofs with dormers where colleges were always extending up into to gain more space. And this is the Turl Street quad with the beautiful Gilbert Scott chapel and a very traditional format. And the site that they purchased is this very long and narrow site, sort of on the edge of the sort of academic heart of Oxford, and a kind of a mix of a 1913 building, 1960s, 1980s, and 1970s, filling what once was a kind of garden court. And so this was the site plan that we were given, and this is Ruskin College, which was the existing building on the site. Not actually, it was obviously Ruskin is the namesake, but Ruskin never taught here, but it was part of the original movement, the sort of education movement in the 19th century to bring higher education to working class men. And so this building was built under that sort of era of Edwardian Baroque architecture, then various extensions in the 1930s and then the 1960s and 70s, and it was a kind of a complete maze of stairs and corridors and completely inaccessible on the inside, but this very important legacy that it was the kind of home of some of the first social justice movements in the UK, including the first women's liberation marches and other kind of social history events that made the building itself important, even though its architecture wasn't fantastic. And the other interesting thing is that William Morris, obviously a student of John Ruskin, is an alumnus of Exeter College. So the historical connections between these thinkers was very important. So our first sort of, in a way, invitation or thoughts about the project was to produce a series of completely different propositions and alternatives for the site, and to sort of leave open what the possibility of the project could be, and to suggest that the project could be any one of these configurations depending on the users and the nature of the sort of quad and the community that Exeter College wanted to produce. And our scheme ended up as this diagram, sort of retaining the facade of the original Ruskin building because the building interior couldn't be kept, and creating what we call the S-shaped quad. So you can see it forms a kind of S, which is in opposition to a traditional quad, which is a U shape. And what this did was gave us, we sort of discovered a new space in the project, which is this space here at the center, because when you make this flip, this transition between two orientations of a south-facing court and a north-facing one, you suddenly find you have a new space in the center. And so this S-shaped quad triggered a new opportunity, which was at the heart of the building, which we called the Learning Commons. So the south-facing quad sort of borrows from Worcester College's gardens. The north-facing quad relates to the artisan cottages of Jericho, and in it we place the auditorium as a kind of jewel, like the chapel of Exeter College. So the idea of the S shape was to create a narrative space that you would have a kind of spatial and landscape journey as you moved through the building, and so these arrows sort of represent this continuous movement and journey through the building, including down a sort of amphitheater and through this space at the center, which is the Learning Commons, and a social learning space, which is Oxford's first. And so the idea of using the topography, because the site slopes, to create a sort of landscape, and then the idea of a destination, that you arrive in the sort of traditional Porter's Lodge, you move through a cloister to the social learning space at the heart of the building, another cloister, and the auditorium at the end, with teaching spaces in the two other arms of the L. And our other challenge was to add additional rooms and additional space without adding too much bulk and mass and height, and so we managed to squeeze more or less 6 stories into what appears to be a 3-story building. And part of that trick was to curve the roof, so the roof doesn't reach up to the highest peak. We've added another story under this curved roof, but the curvature actually reduces the height and creates just the sense of a more kind of Parisian mansard roof rather than an additional story in the building. So this is, in a way, how the building works laterally. So the journey from the front door through Cloister, which overlooks a garden quad, through the Learning Commons at the end to the auditorium. So this is the final plan. I won't go into it in detail, but I think it sort of illustrates this basic organization of sort of teaching spaces, Learning Commons at the center, more teaching spaces, auditorium. And then the kind of workhorse of the project, which is the upper stories of student rooms, so 90 student rooms, and each floor has a kitchen, a sort of family kitchen, and all the corridors have windows at each end, so there's always natural light and views, and always opportunities to capture glimpses of the city and landscape around. And so this idea of a curved roof, and sort of related also to our desire to express the roof as a very distinctive element that gives the quad a new character, a new identity, gives Exeter College a new identity, a 21st century and beyond identity. So the idea was to work with a single plane of material, of metal, to create certain cuts in the metal, and that these surfaces drape over the student rooms like a cloth or a cloak, a soft cloak, and expresses the new student community above the sort of stone plinth of the public rooms. And this is a very early rendering where all of you who use Rhino know this point in the project, where you sort of arrive at the at the kind of idea of the form, the sort of unifying roof form, and then start working hard on the kind of material qualities. And so we started working with timber in terms of the cloister and the framing of the auditorium. These are early studies of the auditorium structure. And what the curved roof gave us, it was these sort of automatically super interesting dormer windows, French doors up in the top floor. When you punctuate a curved surface with a rectangle, you get this really nice kind of tracing of the geometry. And then the kind of key connecting element in the ground floor are the two cloisters. So one is in timber, and it's a convex ellipse. It forms the space of a convex ellipse in plan and in section. And then the north cloister is a concave ellipse. So we worked with blades of either timber or concrete to create a spatial effect. And these two elements come together to sort of tie together the two ends of the building and express that journey. So these are all the building plans. There's actually 7 floors altogether. In the basement, there's now an archive, so special collections archive, as well as common rooms and cafe and storage and commercial kitchen, and a very sort of hardworking basement level, as well as public rooms. And this is the section, so this expresses how the forms step down, the massing steps down, and the curved roofs gradually step down to meet the scale of the neighboring houses. And finally, the sort of expression of the roof we drew on the, in a way, the language of the neo-Gothic cathedral and its leaded spire, the diamond, very distinctive diamond pattern and sort of chevron pattern that you read all through, all around central Oxford, and the sort of arts and crafts spirit of Jericho. And we made that pattern the sort of primary expressive quality of the roof. And so these are shingles made of stainless steel, different oxidized patterns of stainless steel. And so that checkerboard effect becomes a very important kind of signifier in the city skyline. So like every project in Oxford, you have to go through a lot of pain to get it through planning. So these are some of the many books we produced, including a book called The History of the Evolution of Roofs in Oxford, which we had to write to justify our roof design. And this is the project under construction, the whole roof. One-to-one mock-ups we made of our stainless steel shingled roof. And the building under construction, so the roof, the sort of extension to the roof, this is all a retained facade, so it's a completely new building. There's nothing of the original building remaining, unfortunately, so we had to reconstruct this wall-in facsimile. The whole thing was taken down and rebuilt. But you can see the stainless steel roof shingles they actually look very traditional from some points of view. They reflect the ambient light and the nature of the sky. So it's a dynamic surface which is always changing, but in a way subtly disguising the major changes that have happened to the interior of the building. So here you can see the shingles are very sort of iridescent and shiny, bringing light into a north-facing street. This is still under construction, these shots, so apologies for bits of hoardings and things. So this is coming into the building in the Porter's Lodge. So you see into the courtyard, and then the cloister, South Cloister, draws you into the depths of the building, and there are teaching rooms on the right. And it's a pretty limited palette of limestone, cherry wood, and brass. And so handrails and things are in brass. This is the cloister, so these are glulam elements built in the Netherlands, and between so you have this kind of filtering of space and light that changes throughout the day because it's glazed, and then between each one of the cloister fins you can see into study and lecture rooms. And so these are big seminar rooms behind one of the retained facades. But you can see sort of in situ concrete ceiling, new construction. And this is the Learning Commons. So this is the space that wasn't in the project brief that we found when we were doing the competition, and it's the most popular space in the whole building, and even graduates and people from other colleges come to study and work here because it's such an open, informal, and sort of calm, but also active place to work. So it's triple height space down to the cafe towards the south, and then it basically offers a whole variety of different kinds and qualities of space for students to work, and also for fellows and visitors to work, because they hold conferences and all sorts of different events. So every corridor is a place. It's a place to study, or there are built-in benches or places to work. We worked with DePass Montgomery on the signage, so all of the signage is made of brass, sort of working with our palette of materials. This is the auditorium box office, and a William Morris rug that just happened to fit exactly the only wall, the only 4 meter by 4 meter wall we had in the whole building. So that was kind of incredible coincidence. This is the North Cloister concrete with sort of borrowed light from the North Quad, and the auditorium from which you can see back into the Learning Commons. So this project has been, it just achieved its sort of 1 year after practical completion point a month or so ago, so we're still doing snagging, but it's been really well loved by the college and by the students, who really feel like they can find places where they can feel at home throughout the building. That was one of the driving concepts, was that it feels like a home for a scholarly community. Every place is a place of gathering. You can find places that are very open and public to work, or very intimate spaces. And this is one of the fellow studies up under the roof. And there's a fellow studying with a great view in the treetops. And this is the South Quad, so looking to the north, you can see the sort of sculpted mansard roof, and we get wonderful light, sort of dappled light. This is the cloister. It wasn't finished. It was still under construction when we took these pictures, so that's why the bottom doesn't show. But this is the South Cloister, which has a changing light quality throughout the day, and these are the fellow studies up under the top floor. And this is the building pretty much in its final state. So here is our contribution to the morphology of Oxford, our little S-shaped quad, which actually does a lot in a way to be a bridge between the sort of historic core and the sort of North Oxford context. And I've been told that our roof form and our language and the work we did to sort of introduce this new sensibility to the sort of lexicon of Oxford architecture has really opened up the city in terms of its future architecture. So these are my 4 ideals, and as I said at the beginning of the talk, if not us, then who? Thank you.
Thank you, Alison. It's lovely that you closed with the notion of beauty as well as beginning with it and talking us through the work and the expression of that beauty. It's very interesting when you think about beauty. You described it in the terms of quality and quality of life beyond the aesthetic, but to include sort of the intrinsic, if you like. And I think what was lovely about hearing about your work was the idea that it's beyond the instrumental or the commodity or the housing stock, the numbers, the quantity, and into how do you measure the impact of beauty through the intrinsic or the quality of life. And I think the expression is very clear. It's how you hold to some of those principles, and it seems that you hold very steadily to those principles, but I want to try and tease out a little bit about the how, and we don't have huge amounts of time for questions, so if you have some, please think of them and put your hands up and I will come to you, and we probably only have about 5 or 10 minutes. But as you said, you're talking about building communities, building places, and with a sort of deeper sense of time. And within that, we must account for future generations as well as that kind of historic context. At London 2012, we talked about legacy. The renowned environmental activist Joanna Macy talks about designing like ancestors, attuning to those longer rhythms of time and nourishing that felt connection with past and future generations. And this specifically, the Exeter College gave a real sense of that. But you talked about the enlightened client a lot, and everyone saying yes, which I think either you have a fabulous kind of diplomacy, a capacity for diplomacy, or there must be something in this. The client always says yes, because I think that's quite unusual, having worked in regen and design. So beyond the enlightened client, how do you get this sense of ancestral connection, thinking to the future generation and speaking to the past? What must architects do to cultivate this, and how do they do it?
Well, I think a lot of it, specifically in working in housing, is connecting to the history of places. I think immediately creates a sense of relatability. Everybody understands or if it's revealed to them, can understand the sort of architectural legacy and history, cultural history of places and communities. And so if you talk about your work, or I find if I can speak about my work with genuine interest and genuine care and appreciation for the kind of qualities that historic environment produced or offered to the city or to inhabitants or residents, and everybody can relate to them. And it's kind of tragic, but you often end up referring to things that are pre-20th century. Everything up to the turn of the 20th century was good, and we can always say like beautiful Victorian houses or beautiful Georgian houses, but nobody can ever say like a beautiful 1950s house. It's very rare. The concept of sort of generosity and beauty being in sort of residential mass housing was completely lost in the 20th century for the most part. And so a lot of what I talk about is sort of how do we regain those qualities of space. A lot of it's about volume, it's about ceiling height, it's about really good proportions of space and of windows, sort of things that sound really old-fashioned and not interesting to die-hard modernists. But I kind of think, we're beyond the modern project now. They're the project of modernism. We are in a new state of kind of cultural awareness where we can actually draw on the past and also draw on modernism or any kind of reference that we feel is appropriate and relevant and resonates, and use that to create a sort of story around the qualities of place that we all can relate to and appreciate. So, and I think a lot of architects, they stop talking to their clients about history and about beauty and about timelessness and building for the next 300 years. So it's kind of about raising the bar and saying, here is our challenge, and my challenge is not to just deliver this development, it's to create a work of art that is a piece of urban building. And to just come out and say it. I think we've been afraid to say those things for many, many years.
And I think that boldness really resonates with people of all different types, the client to the community. We heard that you referred to the King's Cross programme, and we worked last year with Roger Madlin from who's now British Land, but was the original kind of key player in the Argent work. And his idea about building a piece of city, that this is something that's there for generations beyond oneself, is part of that enlightened thinking, if you like, the 21st century enlightenment, one might say. But I'm interested to think about talking to the wider range of actors who are in this co-design space, if you like, because we're not just talking about the single enlightened client, you're also talking about the planners, and you nodded to that with your enormous array of documentation for Oxford. And you're talking about communities, which this is always a difficult one, but you talked a little bit about an open community platform or some kind of way of engaging in that longer time frame. I think, to have the kinds of conversations you're talking about, that generosity, it requires time. And time is often what you don't have in a statutory consultation period. So what are your thoughts about effective community engagement in these kinds of things?
Yes, I mean, we try to, in a typical sort of regeneration or development program, there are always, consultation periods, and there are dots on your sort of Gantt chart of the project program. And you do try to take time and, get to know the neighborhood, but it's very hard to get to know people and hear their concerns in very limited sort of consultation sessions. You can, the people who can come and the people who can actually speak, and it's very limited. And so I've been really promoting the idea as a mayor's design advocate to create a sort of London-wide online platform for every single neighborhood in London. So there are 500 named neighborhoods in London, and my suggestion is that this platform gives everybody who lives in a London neighborhood access to what is going on in their locality, and so that they can see what's going on, understand, the sort of development plans, planning policy, what the history of their neighborhood is, how they can actually participate, put forward ideas and input, a sort of feedback, a kind of open source neighborhood design platform. And in a way to change the way we communicate about urban design and regeneration, so it's not sort of top down and there's a consultation period, but it's actually a live platform that people can access every day, wherever they are, online, or go to a local neighborhood sort of place where, if they don't have computers at home, and actually contribute, and so that we help everybody to understand that they can participate in design. I think it's about opening up the world of design to everybody, especially young people, because the more people who think they can actually design, then they will care about design and they will become sort of patrons of design themselves. So yeah, this is my sort of another idealistic proposal, but I think in order to get everybody to really sort of appreciate the mission, there is a really big mission out there, and it's a shared mission of making really good, healthy cities that are beautiful places to live, and that they can actually contribute in a meaningful way. That's what I think is missing now.
Also with that kind of longer form deliberative process. Okay, we have run over time, so I shall take one question from the audience. I might be able to come back, but we have already run over time. The microphone is coming to you, sir. If you can keep it nice and short and sweet.
Yeah, wonderful lecture, thank you. But a challenging question. Do you accept there might be a tyranny of beauty, and that there might be a function in ugliness?
Oh, that's a nice one.
There might be a what?
A functional ugliness, or a function in
Yeah.
ugliness? A pragmatism in ugliness, a possibility, an indeterminateness in rather than tidying everything up and making it beautiful, which I think is your skill and gift, but it's also problematic, I think.
Yeah, I think it's always, I think ugliness can be good. And I think there's good ugly and bad ugly. And I think a lot of what people consider ugly is because it's unfamiliar, and the normal human reaction to the unfamiliar is fear, and the association is with fear is, well, that's ugly, and it's to be feared because it's new, it's unknown. And I think we have to always redefine what beauty is. like even my project in Oxford, somebody on the planning committee said that it was an abomination that would damage Oxford for, decades. And, they thought it was ugly. And so in a way, it has to be about the quality of space and the quality of accommodation and the way and light and sort of sensory things that people can't actually say are ugly or beautiful because they're experiential or existential. I don't know, it's tricky. You have to sort of go beyond the aesthetic, I totally agree, and try to describe what is beauty in other terms rather than aesthetic.
Yeah, you're talking very much about order, only by chaos. Is there a place for chaos in the world?
Yeah, definitely. There's beautiful chaos, for sure. It doesn't all have to be orderly. But sometimes, yeah, there are places that are too orderly that we introduce chaos into because, too much of a good thing is generally a bad thing. And in many, for example, in many housing estates, they're way too orderly. They're too uniform. There's a monoculture, there's an architectural monoculture, there's a social monoculture. It's intolerant of mass and diversity, and that's the biggest problem of those places. And so, yes, we have to be brave enough to introduce mess sometimes and to risk doing things that can be considered ugly.
So I recognise you kind of sneaked in 2 questions there, and we are now 10 minutes over time because the body of beautiful work that we went through, and I think you can rephrase that good, bad and ugly to good, ugly and bad, ugly, and work out where to go with that. Do please join us downstairs. We do have a drinks reception, and thank you again to the Bossom family for this ongoing series around the built environment. But we really have run out of time. Hopefully Alison will be able to maybe join us downstairs to continue the conversation. But thank you again for taking us through the full rendition of beauty, and we're particularly happy to have seen a lot of housing in there as well, because the housing is very high up on the agenda now, but it's a very shrill discourse, and it was interesting to think about that longer term, and my colleague Jonathan is running a project called Housing Equity, which is trying to really think about what is the longer term thinking about housing, not just this immediate policy response which may be coming out of some of the more tense areas. So I do hope that you will all be able to stay and join the discussion at a drinks reception in the Benjamin Franklin room downstairs. But finally, please join me in thanking our terrific speaker, Alison Brooks.